Greetings, everyone. This is Professor Knoyer, and I'm recording this lecture from the United States. Unfortunately, I cannot be there to present this in person at the time of the lecture, so I've asked Professor Mayang Vahia to be present for comments, and he's graciously agreed to do this. This is the 23rd Gulestan and Rustam Bilamoria Endowed Lecture for the Asiatic Society of Mumbai. And I especially want to thank Ushaji and Minalji for inviting me to present this prestigious talk. It's a great honor for me to be able to present this here to you today. I also want to thank the Department of Archaeology and Museums, Government of Pakistan, the Archaeological Survey of India, the Ministry of Heritage and Culture Oman, and the Office of the Advisor to His Majesty the Sultan for Cultural Affairs for allowing me to work in Pakistan and India and in Oman to study aspects of the early Indus civilization. In addition, I want to express my thanks to all the many colleagues who have shared their ideas and data on the Indus writing and seals. Special thanks to Professor Mahadevan and Professor Parpola and many others, I can't list all of them, for their contributions to this field. So I've learned greatly from reading their articles, and I'm going to be presenting some of my own perspectives, but also acknowledging their important contributions. As I mentioned at the beginning, I especially want to thank Professor Mayank Bahia for his comments at the end of this lecture. Funding for my research in the Indus Valley has come from many different sources, and I especially want to thank Harappa.com, which provides a very good platform for presenting data right away. So in our excavations at Harappa, every time we found a seal, we very quickly photographed it and put it up on Harappa.com so that people throughout the world could see the new discoveries right away. Early writing, developing in the ancient world, of the old world, I should say, has been identified in three major areas and possibly a fourth in the Mediterranean. We have it in China, we have it in Mesopotamia, we have it in Egypt, we have it in Crete with early Minoan hieroglyphs, and we have it in the Indus Valley, so in South Asia. So these are the main areas. Many people don't consider the Indus as an important region because we have not yet deciphered the Indus script and cannot read the writing. We also cannot read Linear A, which is the earliest form of writing in the Mediterranean, though Linear B is now understood to be the ancestor of later Greek. The area for the Indus script is very large, and it covers an area that extends throughout the Indus Valley, but it's bordered on all sides by other regions which are important because they provided contributions to the cultural developments of the Indus, and also presumably some components of the Indus writing may have derived from interactions with people in those regions. So Baluchistan to the west, the Helmand Basin, which is the Helmand River, areas of Kandahar and Shahrisokta, which is on the border of Iran, Bactromargiana, which is the areas of Central Asia and Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. And then to the west, we have Malwa region of Rajasthan and Haryana, and the Ganga of India region, which links to the upper Indus Valley, and then the Deccan area, which links to Gujarat, and then across the Arabian Sea to Oman, where we have links with the Arabian Peninsula. All of these regions provided interaction with the Indus, and I think it's important to consider them when we talk about the developments in the Indus Valley itself. I've put a chart here which shows the chronology of the Indus civilization and comparable chronologies of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and China. And I don't have time in this lecture to go over in detail the comparisons of these civilizations, but we can see that in the green area, all of them were developing food-producing capacities of learning domestication of plants and animals at about the same time. We see the development of regional cultures emerging in all four regions. And then the red area indicates when we see urbanism developing. And urbanism is where we see also the development of writing. So the earliest writing, most people argue, developed in Mesopotamia with the early urban centers. But we will see from this lecture that actually Writing in the Indus Valley also developed at about the same time as in Mesopotamia, and we also know that Egypt also saw writing developing at about the same time. Now, it's possible that writing developed even earlier in Mesopotamia, but we don't have any evidence for that yet. In China also, we have writing developing at about the same time, around 3300, 4000 BC, during the Longshan period. This is something that I won't have time to go into today, but these are developments now that are showing that all four regions were developing writing systems at about the same time. The important area, the issue about the Indus is that there's no evidence for the development of writing in the areas surrounding the Indus. So even though they may have contributed to what was happening in the Indus, they themselves did not develop independent writing systems. So the Indus is the only region, the area of the Indus River and the Ghaggar Hakra Saraswati River that flows in the valleys in the northwestern part of the subcontinent. That's where we see writing developing. And the earliest script, I would say, develops around 3300 BC. There's possible evidence of writing even earlier, maybe 3700 BC, and even possibly as early as 4000. Before beginning the talk or getting into the details, I want to outline some major questions that I will be addressing and also answer them here so that people can see what the questions are and what you will hopefully get from my presentation today. So the first question is, did the Indus script emerge from internal processes, or was it the result of outside influence? Earlier scholars always proposed that everything happening in the subcontinent came from outside. So the Western developments in Mesopotamia resulted in urbanism spreading across Iran and coming into the Indus Valley. We know today that this is not true. The Indus urbanism developed indigenously, and Indus was not isolated from other regions, but we can say that the writing itself was something that developed indigenously. It did not come from outside, and it's not linked to regions to the west. The second question is the early writing reflective of a spoken language or just a sequence of symbols that represent ideas or identities? Current research in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, and developing in China show that the earliest symbols that we associate with writing were not meant to be representative of spoken language. They did not have grammar. They did not have syntax. It was not that they were recording a speech that somebody was writing or was speaking. They were symbols that represented ideas and concepts and presenting ideologies that people understood by the context in which they were written and how they were presented. So the Indus Valley itself also does not have a writing system in the early phase that was meant to replicate this grammar and syntax of spoken or written language as we see it today, and spoken language. This has been demonstrated by a wide range of studies being done by Nisha Yadav and Mayank Vahia, and I will not be talking about them specifically today, but he may add some of this in the comments at the end of the talk. But clearly, the Indus script is not just a series of symbols. It is a writing system, and it is associated with language. We also have to recognize that unlike Mesopotamia and Egypt, the Indus writing system may never have been used to write long texts. So it didn't start out writing long text, and it never seems to have developed into writing long texts. But it still may have been used to express formal titles, names, and formula that were part of speech. Another question is, what is the context for the emergence of writing? When does writing emerge? And we can see, based on the archaeology of many excavations in what is now Pakistan and India, that writing developed along with the emergence of urbanism. And I'll give some examples of this and evidence from different sites. It emerged along with other technologies. So writing needs to be seen as a technology. It's a technology similar to weights and jewelry making and technology of vehicles and transport and economy that's used to differentiate social strata. to differentiate classes within the communities, and it's clearly linked to ideology, so religion and belief systems, as well as economics. And the role of writing in economics is something that we've been studying very carefully in the Indus Valley, and we can clearly link it to economic transactions, evaluation, and accounting to some degree. And this was used for reinforcing the power of individuals as well as classes of people. Another question is, did the Indus script symbols and writing change over time? And I will give examples through the talk today that yes, the script did not appear fully formed. It started out in a very distinctive style. It changed over time. We see the addition of new symbols. We see the disappearance of some symbols, and we definitely see the disappearance of animal symbols. So the final writing, which you see at the bottom of this slide, was presented without any animal motif. So, and I'll explain that more throughout the talk. The other question is it possible to decipher the Indus script without the aid of a bilingual text? The short answer is no. There is no way to decipher a text, such as the Indus script, unless we know the language and unless we have a bilingual or trilingual text that we can compare it with. So far, we have never found a text that has both Indus script and another writing system on it. Now, there are texts from Mesopotamia that are written in Sumerian or Akkadian, and they are written on Indus-style seals. We assume that they reflect Indus-style names or writing, but we cannot confirm it and we cannot test it. In this presentation, I will not discuss decipherment. I will not discuss how script symbols, what they mean. The closest that I will get is a symbol such as this, which is found on an early seal from Harappa, which shows what might be a house, and a seal from the later period showing the similar seal, which might also be house. And if you think of a house as a clan symbol, then you could call it kula, or the symbol of my clan. And this could be a symbol of an identity of a community, but that's all we can say. And we cannot associate it with sound or specific meaning. How was the script used and who had control of it? We can tell by the way it's found archaeologically that the script was used by people who had wealth and power. And this will be covered in more detail throughout the presentation, and it relates to the final topic, which will be presented at the end of this talk. Why did the Indus script disappear when many other aspects of Indus culture continued? And the short answer is, when people who had the power lost that power, they had no need for texts, and nobody else needed their texts, and it was lost, and no one used it no one developed a writing system for over 1,000 years. So these are some of the major questions that we'll be covering in the talk, and now we'll be going into some little bit of background on what writing does in a society. So before we talk about the Indus, I want to just compare some of the things that we see in other cultures with what we're going to be looking at in the Indus. Some scholars, Bowman and Wolf, in 1994 wrote a very important article on literacy and power. And when we think of writing, we need to think of what writing is used for and how it's used. And they look at writing in two ways: power over texts and power exercised by the means of the use of texts. Power over text means that people who are writing things can restrict who can write and who can read, who can hold the texts, who can look at the texts, who can use them, and who can interpret them. So this is power over texts. And in different societies, we know, like in China, the texts were written by shamans, religious ritual specialists. They were kept in a very small area of a palace. They were buried in the pits. They were curated and kept in very close control, and nobody outside of that palace was ever able to see them. Another technique is power exercised by the means for the use of texts. And even in China, the texts were used to legitimize the deeds and the spoken words of and works of the of the rulers. So they used them to legitimize their power to other elites and to other shamans within their community. In hieroglyphic writing, which emerged in the Egyptian region of Egypt, in a very small region along the Nile, the only way we can read Egyptian hieroglyphs, or we think we can read Egyptian hieroglyphs, is through the decipherment based on a trilingual inscription of Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. So we would never be able to read this without that text. And even today, we cannot read some of the earliest texts, which are in the small little white ivory discs, ivory squares, because we don't know what they specifically mean. They look like some later symbols, but we can't prove it because we have no bilingual text from that time period. These earliest forms of writing were not writing entire sentences. They were not grammatically and syntactically the form of spoken language. They were symbols. They were symbols identifying a community, a commodity, and people who read them and looked at them could understand that this may have come from this part of the country as a donation for a burial of a ruler. We also see writing encoded on other tablets, which is in the bottom right, which indicate rituals and sacrifices that were going on. Similarly, in Mesopotamia, the earliest writing, which is called proto-cuneiform, were symbols relating to rations that were being accumulated or given out of temples and palaces, and later became much more streamlined into a formal cuneiform form. This writing eventually was used to write long texts and proclamations, and the only way we can decipher it is because of the Behistun inscription in Iran, which was written by Dariush I, which talked about how he had conquered the whole world and conquered 10 kings. So this was put on a mountain and written in 3 languages. And if it hadn't been for this text, we again would not be able to read cuneiform, and we would not know that cuneiform was used to write many languages. So cuneiform was used to write Sumerian, Akkadian, Ugaritic, and many other dialects of the region. So it wasn't used to simply write one single language. Maya writing in the New World, and I'm jumping to the New World just to explain that even here we have a writing system which finally, after several hundred years, people have beginning to understand. We still cannot fully read Maya writing. Bishop Diego de Landa, a Franciscan priest, he was responsible for destroying many texts, but he also wrote a record of what he understood the script to mean. And based on this and some various studies that scholars have done, many people think that they can read certain aspects of Maya writing. But we don't know exactly what it sounded like, except by comparing it to modern Maya dialects, and we cannot fully understand all of the signs. So even though many people say certain languages have been deciphered, we have to remember that they are deciphered to an extent, but not fully. Power exercised by the means of the use of texts is where texts are used to legitimize actions or to control people. So if you write it down that there was a flood, then this becomes a fact, it becomes a reality, and people believe this. You can also have oral traditions that have been passed down for thousands of years, as in many parts of the world. And those oral traditions never have to be written down. They can just be stated and people believe them. In Mesopotamia, they actually wrote down those oral traditions, and this helped to legitimize their reality. So the concept of writing down becomes reality is something we see in Western cultures. When you write something, then there is always the potential of somebody to change that writing. And we see evidence of land records that have been revised. So somebody came and crossed out somebody's name. They redrew the lines for the properties, so they modified these records. So once you've written something down, people can come and change it. And power over text means that I have the right to come and erase the name of a person. In Egypt, if you erased the name of a person from a tomb, it was destroying their soul in the afterlife. So you could absolutely wipe out and eliminate and totally annihilate somebody that you did not want by removing their name from a monument. And this is seen many times in Egyptian monuments. We see an example of an Indus seal where somebody removed the symbols of an Indus seal. Now this happens to be an unfinished Indus seal. So it could have been one that was being carved and then somebody decided that either they were no longer affiliated with that group or the spelling was wrong and the student did it, or the apprentice did it incorrectly, so the master of the workshop crossed it out and threw it away. We don't know, but this is also something that we see happening in the Indus as well. Writing form is closely related to the nature of bureaucracy. So when writing is used to legitimize power, then we see in Mesopotamia lists of kings. King so-and-so, son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, entire lists that are made often hundreds of years afterwards to demonstrate people's power and their lineage, to show that they have ancestry going back to the beginning of time. These texts were controlled, and they were ways that a ruler could demonstrate their power by mounting them in public places where people could see. They did this in Egypt as well. In the Indus, we have no long texts, we have no long inscriptions, and we have no lists of names and commodities. So this is not something that people in South Asia did. It's definitely a distinct pattern of West Asia and in Egypt, and it's not something that is part of South Asian tradition, at least at this time. So Indus writing was used very differently than that seen in other cultures. Its origin was also probably very different and not sudden, but gradual development over time. Indus script begins with the early potter's marks and graffiti of the Ravi and Kot Diji phases, about 3700 to 2600 BC, in an area of the two rivers, the Indus and the Ghaggar Hakra Saraswati River, that flow in the northwestern part of the subcontinent. We'll be talking about this in more detail in a second. The chronology of this time period is presented here, and I won't go into great detail on this, but we see the regionalization period starting about 5000 BC, but the earliest writing is about 3700. And then by 2800 we see early Indus script, then we see the Harappa period coming, and from 2600 to 1900 we have the Indus writing system being used extensively. During the localization era, during the late Harappan, we have no use of Indus script. So this is when the Indus script gradually and completely disappears. Now, different sites have examples of early graffiti, and some scholars in the very beginning began studying this and found that there was not a lot of connection between the early graffiti and potter's marks with later writing. So earlier scholars tended to disregard that link. So this is from Mehrgar, potter's marks that were made pre-firing on pottery, and some that were made post-firing, which do not have clear links to the later writing system. Studies of other sites such as Periana Gundai and Amri also provided evidence of early writing, but not very many signs showed links to the Indus writing system itself. Right now, a colleague of mine, Dr. Qasid Mallah from Shah Abdul Latif University, Khairpur, is excavating at Amri to try to collect more pottery to get an understanding of the early writing at Amri. Cassal's study by the French early excavations showed evidence of some signs, and then the use of some signs in the Harappa period, when we can see a link to the Harappan writing. From the site of Kot Diji, also, F.A. Khan found examples of graffiti, only one of which was illustrated. We also see at Kalibangan in Haryana, or in Rajasthan, evidence of one of the most important signs that later became incorporated in the Indus script. These sherds are from the lower levels of Kalibangan, according to Bibi Lal, and you can see that this sign is identical to the sign that Parpola calls 342, and Brian Wells refers to as another number. But this sign, as I want to remind you, is one of the most important signs of the Indus writing system, and it appears in the early Harappan period, or the Kot Dijian, or the regionalization era. There must be many more signs from the early phases in Kalibangan, and I'm looking forward to seeing more detailed studies of this in the future. We also have signs found from Rakhigarhi that have been reported by Amarendra Nath, and these studies, as soon as they're fully published, will be able to provide us much more evidence of the development of early writing in Rakhigarhi area. This is a study by Khatri, who is studying the site of Kunal, and he sees signs that are found in the early Harappan that are also linked to the later Harappan script. And there are some that do continue, and then there are some that do not continue. So, and we also see evidence of signs that are multiple signs. And the one with the yellow, orange arrow is similar to sign 342, but doesn't have the final details on it. From the site of Remanderi, we have a symbol that, according to Durrani, is similar to the Indus script of 342. And this is an important continuity from the northern part of the Indus Valley. We also have many signs which might link to the Indus script, but they were carved onto ivory pendants. We have also probably the most important site that has the best documentation is the site of Balakot, which was excavated by Professor Dales. And this is a study done by Uta Franca, where she has been able to identify this symbol on pottery from the Balakotian period, which appears as a graffiti on pottery, and along with many painted signs, some of which become part of the Indus script. One area that we do not have good evidence for early writing is the region of Gujarat. So in Gujarat we have many early Harappan sites, and Moti Pipli is one of them, but unfortunately no graffiti was found at the site, and they have looked for it, but it has not been found and not discovered on the pottery. So I'm looking forward to current excavations at other sites to see if maybe Gujarat will also have some evidence of early writing. Moving to Harappa and the core areas of the Indus Valley, we can see that the development of early urban centers, which was happening throughout the Indus Valley, the data that I'm going to present today is mainly the stuff from the site of Harappa. And Harappa during the Ravi phase was linked through trade all the way to Baluchistan, to Rajasthan, to Gujarat, to NWFP, which is the northwestern provinces, and even to Central Asia. During the Ravi phase, we see some important symbols which become part of the Indus writing system, but they also appear as geometric button seals. This is on a bone seal from the Ravi phase at Harappa, which I think may possibly be part of a swastik motif. And later on, the swastik becomes part of a formal ideological symbol, but it's also found in the writing system. The Ravi phase at Harappa, however, is most important because this is where we find evidence of multiple signs combined together, and that these signs, I argue, represent the earliest use of writing on post-firing graffiti of pottery. And we don't know what it was used for, except to identify contents or maybe rituals that were being associated with these vessels. We also have pre-firing potter marks, which I don't think are necessarily linked to writing. And in this chart, you can see that there's pre-firing and post-firing graffiti, and there are certain symbols that are found in the Ravi phase, such as this one, are similar to ones found in the Kotdiji phase, which then become part of the Harappan writing system and one of the most important signs. I'm not going to go into the details of the numbers, but we can see approximately similar percentages of symbols pre-firing and post-firing from the two time periods. Then we have signs that may link to the concept of a house, and this house sign, we don't know what it means, but it looks like some of the houses that are depicted in other seals and in narratives. So this may symbol the symbol for clan or household. When we see two signs together, this suggests that these signs are combining to become important symbols of a sequence of signs. These are found both on pre-firing and post-firing forms. And then we start seeing signs found on seals that are pressed into clay, where that symbol becomes an important sign relating to power. Seals are found as geometric forms, and most of them were glazed. But then we start seeing seals with an animal motif, and this seal has writing associated with it. This is a broken elephant seal, and it probably had writing above it. And these seals were found on the same layer as a cubical stone weight, which is identical to the later Indus weight system, and this suggests that power and value and control become an important linkage to writing. So here we see, again, the sequence showing the Ravi phase at Harappa, the Kotdiji phase, and then the seal on the bottom left shows that incorporation of those symbols within the later Harappan script itself. So here is a clear example from one site showing the development of writing and the incorporation of writing into a complex system of expression that becomes formalized around 2600 BC. So this is at 3300, this is at 2800, and this is at 2600. Now, a recent study by Konosukawa, who is a scholar from Japan, also working in India on sites such as Kunal and Rakigari with Professor Shinde, he has done a comparison of the numbers of signs found on seals and from the Ravi phase, seals and pottery from the Ravi phase, and from the Kotdiji phase, and from the earliest levels of Harappa seals found in sites both in Pakistan and in India. And he's counted that we have a very few numbers of signs in the earlier period. In the initial phase of the Harappan period, we have around 71 signs. That's it. So this means that there are not that many different signs found on the early seals of the Harappa period. So at this time period, 71 signs does not represent the full number of signs we see later, which is over 450, and this suggests that writing develops and changes over time. When we get to the full urban phase and we combine all the seals from the different sites, these are based on the studies by Mahadevan and Parpola, scholars have argued between 400 to 450 signs. Some people argue even more. And that combination of all these signs suggests that there's really a large variation from site to site. And Professor Vahia and Nisha Yadav have been doing studies of how many signs are found at different sites. They published a recent article in 2011 and then one in 2017, which shows that many signs are regional specific, so that they're not found in every site, they're only found in some sites, and this suggests that there may be regional varieties or dialects of the writing system that is distinctive. And when we summarize things in a line drawing like this, we lose that detail, and we need to develop a better system of studying the writing. Overall, people argue that the writing system was logosyllabic, where a single sign can mean either a word or a syllable or a sound. And some of them are clearly pictographs, so it looks like a man or a person, but they may represent an ideographic system. So here's an animal, we have squirrels, we have fish, we have different symbols that are there, and we don't know when a sign is a pictograph and when it is being used as an ideograph and when it's being used as an entire word. So this makes it very complicated to interpret. In summary, then, we can see the early origins during the early Harappan period, where we have potter's marks and graffiti, and this is found throughout the Balochistan and the Indus Valley, except for Gujarat. We hope to find it in Gujarat soon. We have the Kotdiji phase, where we have early Indus script on seals and also on pottery, and sealings. And then the Harappa phase, when we have it seen at all the major sites throughout the Indus, even into Oman and Kuwait and in areas of Mesopotamia and in Central Asia. And then the late Harappa phase, there are no seals. There is no writing. There is sometimes graffiti, but it's not clear if it is from that time period or not. The evidence for early writing is found, the first concrete evidence was found at Harappa. And this is a seal that I excavated from this street, and we can date it to 2800 BC. And this shows, or 2600 BC, and this shows the earliest form of writing on a seal. And the seal has an animal facing to the right. When you stamp it in clay, it's facing to the left. Later seals, the animal is facing to the left. When you stamp it in clay, it's facing to the right. So this would be a left-facing versus a right-facing animal, and these are important symbols that probably have very important ritual meaning. The confirmation that this is early can also be seen, or this style is an early style, is seen when we start comparing it with sites such as Farmana. So Professor Shinde's excavation at Farmana found similar seals, also right-facing, with just one or two signs, and sometimes three signs. And they found a sealing, which shows the earliest evidence of the unicorn, so the one-horned animal that becomes a very important symbol in the Harappan period. A discovery of a seal on the surface of the site of Wattuwal in Cholistan by Professor Farzan Masih from the University of Punjab also found a similar seal, but this has a goat, or a wild goat. So these are examples of the early seals, and they have only one or two signs, and sometimes three signs, which are carved in a distinctive pattern. And it's on the basis of that that Konosukawa developed his counts. 71 symbols. Now later on we see the unicorn becomes the most common form of motif on seals, and it becomes 65 to 68% of the seals have unicorn. And I argue that this reflects a mid-level bureaucratic position. These are the people who were the most important for making sure that the Indus civilization functioned. And obviously people who do that are usually not liked very much. So if you think of the tax collectors who come and make sure you pay your taxes and file your forms, the people represented by the unicorn seal are going to be those people. And I'm not sure that everyone in the Indus civilization really liked them. Because when the Indus civilization no longer was powerful, this symbol disappeared and the writing disappeared. So I think we have to link these things very closely together and understand that this symbol was probably a symbol that not many people liked, but it was important for the function of the Indus cities. Here we have an example of a house at Harappa, which gives the first evidence that many different types of writing were used by one group of people or one family living in one house. This is an old seal that has been heavily worn. It was not broken. It was put into this pit. This is a conical piece of clay that has been fired, low fired. It was possibly part of a ritual. There's an animal tied to a rod, and it was found in this pit next to this oven. These other tablets were found in these back rooms, and fragments of broken seals were found in the fill, and all of this was found in a house floor that was dating to period 3B, which is about 2450 BC. So this is an example of the first example that shows that people in one household were using multiple types of objects with writing on them, some that relate to accounting, some relating to control, and some possibly relating to ritual. We were also able at Harappa in our excavations to demonstrate which seals were from the early levels and which ones were from the later levels. And based on the styles of patterning and the shapes, you can see that some of the early seals have distinctive types of carvings on them, and some of the later ones have other varieties of carvings. We're still working out some of these details. The boss shapes, this is an example of a boss that is not completely finished. It's squarish, and this is one that has been rounded, so many seals were maybe used even when the back wasn't finished. They continued to be used. So we have some very interesting patterns of seal use based on these excavations. We also were able to excavate from natural soil in street levels, and so we found all the different periods in which seals and tablets were used, and we were able to show how from 2450 BC to the period 3C, which is 2200 BC, there's slightly different styles of objects being found, and tablets made of clay impressed with seals and also with narrative scenes, become more common in the later levels. We also saw the evidence that by 3b, some seals were made with no animal motif at all. So this unfinished seal and broken seal were found in one room, but in the drain of the house, so people were throwing things in the trash, this is a seal that was actually broken in excavation, but it's a seal that has no animal motif. So during this time period, some seals had animals with writing, and some seals had only writing with no animals. This is an important differentiation that indicates aspects of ideology that become relevant, I think, in the very final phases of the Indus. Seal carving techniques are also something that has been studied by many scholars, because if you can identify where the seals were made, we can understand a bit more about who was controlling the production. And Paul Rissman began these studies in 1989. Uta Franca did this as well. I've been studying this to try to understand carving techniques and looking at the details of carving to identify craft workshops and control of production. And one of my students, Greg Jameson, carried out this work. These are examples of saws for cutting steatite and possible tools. Greg Jameson did his dissertation on this, comparing the types of seals carved in different sites, and he found evidence that some groups have more standardized inscriptions and others have more variable. We have some intra-group variation, and this also suggests that there's a high variation in carving techniques between different parts of the Indus Valley. So this will also link to the studies by Mayank Bahia and Nisha Yadav on style of the script itself. These also show that these carving styles may have been localized and that local elites were in charge of making their own seals, which also means that if you can make a seal, then you also can reinforce your power and ideology. So this was something not totally centralized, not just one seal workshop for the entire Indus, but different seal workshops in different cities and also throughout the whole region. Another recent study done by Dennis Furnez on sealings, he studied the sealings from Lothal and also from other major Indus sites, shows that these sealings reflect a way of administration and control of materials that include possibly documents that might be made on birch bark or parchment. We also have containers that were being sealed, so this means that the writing was used to control knowledge as well as commodities. Also, some seals were hung by a cord, which was the boss has a hole in it, and these would have been used for use, but some had symbols on both sides with a hole through the middle, and some remained as simply geometric designs. So these, we call them button seals, but they actually are used sometimes as seals, and they can also be used as decoration. So there's a kind of a vague area between symbol and utilitarian use on some of these materials. And then one of the most unique form of seals, which has a hollow container in the inside and a sliding door to close it, is found from the site of Goladoro or Bagasara in Gujarat, and a similar one has been found from Mohenjo-daro. This seal has writing on one side and 3 Indus signs on 3 sides, possibly a 4th one on the sliding door, which is missing, and a very unique boss which has 3 grooves in the back. So this is probably from the latest phase of the Harappan period, but it reflects that something was being put inside of the seals. And I think of this seal as being a mystery because it might have had a written document on palm leaf manuscript or possibly birch bark or cloth stuck inside here as a tabiz or mantra, which means that they were using writing on perishable materials. And this would suggest that we need to figure out ways to try to find those types of objects in the Indus sites. Writing was also used on pottery, and I'm going to have to move a bit quickly here through this material, but this is one of the large vessels from Harappa that was used for trade. It was actually reused after the finishing of the trade as a latrine, so it was a commode, and it had different symbols on it in different places. It had writing on the shoulder, had stamping on the shoulder, it had writing on the rim, it had writing on the base. So writing can be used in different contexts, pre-firing and post-firing on pottery. And pottery is the most common place for writing to be found on the Indus. These are examples of writing on black slip jars that were used in the Indus, but also traded to Oman. And here's an example of a jar from Oman which has writing on it. And then even in Oman, some local people began to use Indus-style writing on local pottery. So people in Oman began adopting Indus script and using it in their own context. Different styles of writing on the base, on the shoulder, on the rim. The context might have resulted in a different meaning for the same sign. And in Greece, they often used pottery for a scrap paper to write notes on, to write votes on in the Senate, and they would put them in a bucket or into another pot. These are called ostrakhan. We have only 2 examples of ostrakhan from the Indus Valley, which means that the Indus people did not use pottery as a type of scrap paper. They did not write intentionally on pottery. They wrote on pottery, but then it broke, and when it was broken, it was discarded. But only rarely did they take a broken potsherd and then write on it. And these might have been examples of a child or somebody, practicing the writing. But I think that the fact that the Indus did not write on pottery in the same way that the Greeks did, and the people in Egypt, is because pottery was considered juta. It's dirty, it's broken. You don't write something that's sacred on something that's broken. And so rarely we only have 2 examples from Harappa, and I think that this is not a tradition that would be found in the Indus. We find writing on tiny ornaments. This is very, very small. You can barely see it. The early excavators did not recognize this. When I studied this gold object, I found the writing and was the first to report it. And many more had examples of it. This piece of a gold from a bead also has writing. These tiny pieces of bone points that were used for the hair also have writing on them. So writing may have had some association with individuals, but also possibly for ritual purposes. And then we have writing used in industry. So this stoneware bangles were being sealed inside of a container, and then a writing symbol was put on top of it. When the bangles were removed from the kiln, then they were incised with some very tiny writing. You can hardly see them. And this indicates that they were not meant for everyone to read, but somebody needed to know that this bangle goes to this person or this belongs to this status, and these were given as for certain functions. They're found on black bangles as well as red bangles, so the different colors were being fired. The largest writing was found from Dholavira, and Dr. Bish discovered this in the excavation of the northern gateway, and my understanding is that this is a piece of wood that would have been above the gateway and that the wood fell down. So what you're seeing here is the reverse of this inscription made of gypsum, and this would have been the largest form of writing. But there's only one example of this, and it's in Dholavira, and it's not found in any other Indus site. Now they may have painted it on large walls and pigments, but we don't have any of that preserved. We have lots of evidence of sealings, but not as many as in Mesopotamia. And the reason we don't have many sealings, I think, is because in the Indus, no buildings and no temples and no palaces have been found that have been destroyed by fire, except for the site of Lothal. So in Lothal, a large building was burned and the ceilings were found all inside that building. So these are found from Harappa, this one's from Kalibangan, and we have different ceilings from different sites, but very few of them compared to Mesopotamia. We do have some ceilings that indicate evidence of trade. So this is one found in Mohenjo-daro. On one side is an elephant seal of the Harappan period. On the other side is a sealing from Central Asia. Now the Central Asian sealing on one side and Harappan sealing on the other indicates that this is a token or passport used for trade between the two regions. It's like an agreement between two elites. In Mesopotamia, the people chose not to use writing. They didn't use writing. They saw people with writing. They saw them from Mesopotamia. They saw them from the Indus, but they themselves did not use writing. So people in the ancient period chose whether they wanted to use writing or not, and we can see this as a pattern. And so the Indus people used writing for specific things. Central Asians did not use writing, but they traded with each other. And they must have had a way to communicate and understand each other's culture. We also have evidence of a seal made of chlorite, which is not an Indus seal, Indus seals are made from steatite that's been fired, or soapstone. This one is made from chlorite, a slightly different material, but I analyzed this carving, and I argue that this carving is made by an Indus-trained craftsman. So the seal itself is made with by somebody who knows how to make Indus seals and knows how to write Indus writing. It has a lowered headed bull like on the Indus seals, but it's made from a material that is not from the Indus. We don't know where this stone came from. It may have been from Oman, it may be from Iran, but this is an example of a non-Indus made Indus seal. Okay, so very complicated. We also have evidence of seals that are circular, which are found in the Gulf area. So these are found from Bahrain and also further even found in Mesopotamia. And they were made from steatite and white glazed, just like Indus seals. The carving style is like Indus carving, but the motifs are very different. And they include double symbols, which suggests that there's a different language being represented, and that they have a sequence that is different from on the Indus. So this suggests the use of Indus writing to write a different language, and also a distinctive seal, but using Indus motifs. And over time, these seals change, and research done by Stefan Larsson has been able to show the chronology of these seals in Bahrain and in further areas in the Gulf. Then we have seals in Mesopotamia that indicate that links of trade go all the way to Mesopotamia, with Indus traders going to Mesopotamia and interacting with people further to the west. In the Indus, the writing system is clearly linked to economics I've talked about, individuals, possibly for accounting, and we have also links to ideology. So here we have what is associated with a people tree, so 13 people leaves, with a person standing beneath it wearing bangles and a headdress, and on the other side is writing. Here you have a ceremony with people in procession, and above it writing. So writing is associated with ritual. Here you have writing on one side and then some event of bulls fighting underneath a tree, possibly a acacia tree. And then you have multiple tablets with many different narratives shown on them, and then writing again. So writing associated with ideology indicates an important link between these two concepts. Here you see somebody drumming in front of a large image of a tiger, and then 5 swastikas on one side and the same writing on both sides of the tablet. That same writing sequence is found on another tablet, which could be like a damru. And this suggests that this ritual, maybe of drumming, is associated with some special event, and is found both in Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. We have other symbols where writing is associated with architecture. So this is a pillar made of clay, a symbol of clay with a swastika on the base, and a stamba or pillar with rings, and then above it people tree, and on the other side writing. This was found from the site of Lakanjadaro in Sindh by Dr. Qasid Mallah. And writing is clearly linked to numbers, where we have a numbering system, and I won't go into the details of it, but numbers and writing combined together probably relate to rituals and dates and astronomy. So I think we need to understand that the writing system is linked to a wide range of ideas that is much broader than simply economics and identity. And this writing was controlled. So at Harappa, we found workshops where people were making tablets, and this is controlled in a small area, and this workshop was making things that were then traded and taken to all different parts of the site. In the final phase, Harappa period 3C, around 2200 to 1900 BC, we see an increasing number of narrative tablets with writing. We also see the writing system becoming highly standardized with very straight lines, all the symbols the same size, and many, many more symbols included on the writing system. And sometimes this writing is appearing without the animal. When this happens, I argue that this represents a disassociation between the writing and the animal motif. So whoever was using this long seal, and we have many of these in Gujarat, we have them all over Harappa and Mohenjo-daro at this time period. It means that people living in these cities, some of them did not want to be associated with the unicorn and were not linking, and others were. Dr. Yadav and Mayank Vahia have analyzed the numbers of signs found in this period and find that some new symbols have come in. We're trying to get a larger sample to make this more robust, but it suggests that the last phase of the writing sees another modification of the writing, that it becomes more dynamic. We also see these kulhar, or these drinking cups, impressed with writing. No animal motifs are found on it, it's just the writing, so this type of seal. And these are being used for special rituals. So it suggests that writing was being used in special ways in the last phase that is different from what was being done before. We also see in the last phase the beginning of copper tablets with writing on them, some at Mohenjo-daro, some at Harappa, and very complex narratives being displayed. The tablets from Harappa are all made in a molded form with writing, and all of them have the same writing and the same size. The ones from Mohenjo-daro have slightly more variation, but they're also highly standardized, which I argue relates to a form of monetary or coinage associated with each city. So Mohenjo-daro copper tablets would have been only made for Mohenjo-daro, and Harappa ones were only made for Harappa. We don't find them at any other site. Distributions show that most of these copper tablets are found in the lower city at Mohenjo-daro. This means that they are used in an area, only one part of the site, and not in all parts of the site. We also see evidence that a lot of tablets are found in areas that I, at Harappa, can associate with markets. So these are the market areas just inside the gateway, which suggests that certain types of tablets are located in market areas for accounting. So these are examples in the market area and in the gateway area, which suggests that some of them were used specifically for accounting purposes. And these are examples of the pointed base goblets that have impressed seals on them. And we found one of them, like this sign, at a village 1 day's walk from Harappa. So this means that people were coming to Harappa for a special ceremony. They took their pointed base goblet, they took it home to their village, and Dr. Rita Wright found this on a survey of a site near Sahiwal, which is 1 day's walk from Harappa. So it means that people were coming to the cities, involved in rituals. Those rituals involved these containers with stamped seals on them, taking them home probably as a memento, just as you would take prasad or something else home after you've had some special ritual. So writing was being used in ideological ways as well as ways to integrate people in the last phase of the cities. It's also possible that writing was used in a form of contracts. This is a tablet impressed in clay found in Mohenjo-daro. This is a broken tablet with the same impression from the same seal found at Harappa. So it means that somebody either at Harappa or Mohenjo-daro had the seal, made an impression on clay, and then broke the seal and the tablet in half and gave one half to somebody who went to Harappa or to Mohenjo-daro, we don't know. And we don't know exactly which site it's originated at, but it means the two cities were linked. And this is found evidence for in other things like the stoneware bangles. We have many other evidences that these cities had important linkages between the elites. And this one is the one clear evidence for writing links. Then we have the localization era, the end of the Harappan period, when writing disappears. Seals continue. We have geometric seals continuing. In fact, they re-emerge, become very important, but no evidence for graffiti and no evidence for seals, the use of the unicorn or the cubical weights and other aspects that are important for the elites of the Indus cities. So this is the time period when there was a breakdown in internal trade, the changes in the elite structure of the cities. People changed their burial traditions. And the Indus civilization did not collapse. For 900 years, we see a reorganization during a time period when no writing was being used. And this is a phase when many people thought of as the decline of urbanism, but I argue is not the decline of urbanism, it's a change of urbanism. It's a change of elites, and the people who came in decided we're not going to use writing, we're not going to use the unicorn, we will not continue some of the ideologies of the earlier period. So in summary, the writing system of the Indus that we've looked at allows, by looking at it, the context, it allows archaeologists to reconstruct the function and the importance of writing in the economy, the politics, and the ideology of the Indus. We can identify important changes in the use of writing over time. We can see the introduction of new types of inscribed objects, and we can see that the seals disappear, but there might be some graffiti on pottery, but overall writing is no longer used. And the nature of the writing in different contexts suggests that the script was quite versatile and could be used to encode a range of messages which remain undeciphered until we discover a bilingual text. In terms of the power of writing, I think only certain people owned seals and very few people were literate. The script was generally used openly in public, so it wasn't sacred and private in that context. Objects with writing are found all over the sites, in every site, large and small, and almost every settlement has one or more seals or inscribed objects. Writing was not static, but it was a dynamic invention that changed over time, and it permeated every aspect of urban life. I argue that the writing would have reinforced the integration and validated the power of the ruling classes, and during period 3C, the end of the last phase of the Indus cities, it became very, very important for rituals to integrate people. They were using it in a way to help legitimize their power. And it was probably used to associate people with the rulers with supernatural powers that were linking them to deities and rituals. The disappearance of the Indus is when the elites who used this means of communication and trade and ritual were no longer dominant. Now, we do not know what caused that change. There's lots of studies now about climate change and changing rivers and economics, and it's something that we're still trying to figure out. We do know that civilizations do not collapse because of a little bit of weather change, that people are resilient and people are adaptable. But this community, whoever they were that were controlling in the cities with writing and unicorns, seem to have lost their power. And when they lost their power, the unicorn disappeared. The unicorn never is appearing again in Indus and in South Asia until much later during the Buddhist period. We see a lion with one horn, we see an antelope with one horn, but it's not the same unicorn as we have in the Indus. So the unicorn disappears, the script disappears, and the weights disappear, but we still see an important continuities overall in other aspects of Indus culture. In terms of deciphering the script, the Indus script is primarily a logosyllabic script and cannot be translated without knowing what language it represented. There are many languages spoken in the greater Indus region, from the Sino-Tibetan languages in the north, Austroasiatic, Dravidian, Indo-Aryan, and language X, which is the language of the early Neolithic peoples of the region. So many different languages play a role, and I think that actually the Indus writing was used to write more than one language. I don't think of the Indus region as being a monolinguistic area. So in conclusions, I think we can see that there are major advances. The Indus script is not mystical. It's not something we can't understand. We can understand it, but we can't decipher it until we find a bilingual text. And the only way that we're going to find a bilingual text, if there is one, is by new excavations to increase the sample size and the number of inscriptions. And we also need to increase sharing data through international conferences. And this is a lecture that I'm giving to you, hopefully that we will have more communication across all of the region, and online platforms where people can see the artifacts and data analysis for comparison. We've been doing this on harappa.com, and we would like to have more interaction over the years. And I want to say thank you to everyone for listening, and I wish you all the best, and I'm sorry I can't be there for questions, but I will get some feedback from Dr. Yadav, Mayank Vahia, sorry, and also from the organizers of this lecture. So my best wishes to all of you. Stay safe, wear your masks, keep 6 feet apart, and hopefully the vaccine will be soon and we can start interacting again in a normal way in the soon near future. Bye-bye.